Welcome to Atmosoft Tech Talks, a live show where we discuss everything you need to know about software development and technology in business. I'm Natasha, your host, and joining me today is our COO, Bill, a solutions architect at Atmosoft. Hi, Bill. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Glad to be
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Okay. So I have some questions around secure coding practices. So let's
Sure.
just dive right into it. I'll start with the first question. Could you share an example of a time during a code review when you discovered a vulnerability that might have otherwise made it into the production environment? How did you address this issue and what impact did it have on the project?
Okay, so one of the more common ones is when you take input from like a web form or some type of data that you're collecting from an end user, and you just take that input and you just take that input and you put it directly into what's called an inline SQL statement. So an inline SQL statement is just I have my query and I put it in the code and it's a string. And I'm going to add other string values to it, maybe in the where clause, maybe in an or clause, or maybe some type of filter or something like that. And we're just taking the input directly from the end user and we're putting it right in the SQL statement that we're executing that against the production environment. Well, the attack vector here is something called the SQL injection attack. And so we caught that in the code. And then what we did was we moved it to at the time there wasn't the tooling around this now has gotten a lot better. There's that catches a lot of things right now. So SQL injection is a little bit harder than it was. So this is back
Mm.
in kind of the web form days. And so what we did to resolve it was we just moved that into a stored procedure that accepted parameters. And then that way you don't, even if they do a SQL injection attack, the stored procedure doesn't process the string values you pass in as a valid SQL statement to execute. So so that was caught, and then we moved the code where we were doing inline SQL to store procedures. Another method you could do that's kind of protected. So this usually only happens when you're basically like I'm executing a statement against SQL Server, and I'm doing something like select star from orders where order ID equals some number,
Mhm.
and then I come in and the code, so that code would just get executed. So as we move to like Andy Framework Core and different types of ORMs, you also get some protection from SQL injection there. It's basically when you're just passing a string over to SQL Server and saying, hey, execute this code, and then getting back a result set. So we modified the process, and then from there we moved on to basically having a store procedure, kind of an interface layer to the database, and all of our interactions were through the stored procs instead of having that inline SQL. So that was one way to resolve, and the way that it impacted everything was we just had to go in and we just removed the inline SQL and moved it to store procedures. But again, if you're using an ORM and you're not executing raw SQL that's collected from a user input string, this is probably not a problem that you'll see a ton of times. But if you are doing, execute raw SQL commands and you're appending user input, you should make sure that that is sanitized.
Yep. Sanitizing input, one of the golden rules that we
Yeah,
have since
yeah,
this
yeah.
age.
Yep.
Okay. That was very insightful. Are you ready for question two?
I am ready.
Okay. How do you ensure that knowledge about security's best practices is effectively shared within the team during a code review? Can you share an instance where the exchange of knowledge led to significant improvements in code security?
Sure. So number one, there's two ways that you do this. Number one, there's the dialogue that you have during code review, and a code review should always be a collaborative process. This isn't a this is just getting a second pair of eyes on the work you've done. It's not to belittle people. It's also sharing information about the code base, so someone else is aware of changes that you've made and stuff like that. So a code review should never be an adversarial process, in my opinion. I think it's more productive to work as a team, and you're basically just double checking your stuff. Make sure your logic's right. Make sure everything else is right. So the number one, coding standards are extremely important. So that's communication outside of the code review process, which doesn't directly answer the question, but I want to bring that up.
Yeah.
Coding standards are a good thing, and you should have coding standards that have security in mind, basically. So your coding standards should include stuff about security. Don't do inline SQL statements. Don't just execute raw code from the user or execute raw input from the user. Everything needs to be validated on every step of the application, right? And that's a good practice anyway, right? You get better code that way when you're basically, I'm not going to assume that this function is going to pass me the right values. I'm going to double check and make sure that I have the information to execute properly on that function. So that's the first part. In the code review process itself, if you notice a security flaw in the code, then as the code reviewer, you would communicate that to the developer who worked on the code, and you would basically say, hey, listen, I noticed you're doing this here. This can lead to a security problem via X, and then you explain what the security problem is so that they're getting educated about that particular security issue. And so that's kind of how you teach the team. So number one would be coding standards. Which I think are important. And they could be as detailed or as loose as you want, right? So it's like a coding standard could be before code gets pushed into production, it's reviewed by the team, and every function needs to have a section where they're doing validation of their inputs, and then that becomes kind of a checklist for you during the code review process, so that you can go through and say, yep, okay, he's validating all of his inputs, he's returning appropriate result. He's handling his error cases in case something goes wrong. Error handling is another subject we could actually talk about tomorrow, where we could talk about techniques around error handling and being secure in error handling, because you can give away a lot of information if you just let your app bubbles the error all the way up, which happens more often than I think it should. So did I get both parts of those, or what was the second part?
The second part was, can you share an instance where this exchange of knowledge led to a significant improvement in code security?
Sure. So communicating about a code issue, or sorry, about a security issue in the code to the person whose code that you're reviewing is an effective strategy to educate the team on possible security vulnerabilities. The other thing that I've seen organizations do is there'll be two code reviews. There'll be the general code review, which is with other developers on your team. And then there'll be a code review with a senior engineer, maybe on SecOps or the security and operations team. And they'll come in and they'll review the code with you too from a security standpoint. So you can kind of silo those and kind of get like, okay, I expect my general development team to be aware of security issues and to be implementing best practices that come from the security operations team. And but we're going to do the general code review where we'll catch most of it, but we're also going to have the security team or someone who's in charge, whose job is just security, to come in and review the code too. And I think if you see the issue, if you see a code vulnerability or a code security issue in the code, and you've run into that problem multiple times with multiple team members, at that point I would take it to my manager, the product owner. I'd say, hey, listen, let's have a quick 30-minute meeting and review this particular code security issue so everyone can get on the same page. I think that's a viable strategy that I found effective in the past.
Yeah, I think it's really good. It helps people because it's like there's no point in shaming them. We just need to give them the information that maybe they aren't.
The information that we have to keep in our head about programming is so broad. You can't expect everyone to be an expert about everything. I'm not an expert. I'm an expert in some things, but I mean, the further you go down the rabbit hole, kind of the more you realize how much you just don't know, because the space is just so huge. All of software development, web development, desktop development, server security, CI/CD, automation. I mean, there's just so many broad categories. So just educating people is always a good thing.
Yeah. I also think, especially as you go through like different jobs, you'll have like different standards for each job. So you don't know, maybe the like security that you learned at your previous job that you're used to isn't up to par with like the new security standards.
Yeah, most organizations don't run exactly the same. So you got to be really flexible in that aspect of things.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to our third and final question, which is, how do you enforce secure coding standards during code reviews? What challenges have you encountered in the process, and how have you overcome them?
Okay. So. Hmm. So, to that question, the enforcement. So there's two types of enforcement. So I'm trying to think of the best one. There's going to be automated tools that will scan your code for vulnerabilities. Those are
Mm.
useful. And I know those are getting there's more and more of them out there. I mean, I think you could. I think GitHub Copilot and putting your code and or you shouldn't put your code in ChatGPT unless you have permission, but you could put something similar in there and say, are there any security vulnerabilities in here that I should consider? And it will give you an analysis of a function or a class and let you know if it sees anything. I think using a tool or an automated tool and scanning your code base is probably a good idea. I don't think you'll get, you're not going to get 100% coverage there because some of the security vulnerabilities could be a little more complicated to kind of source out. And but as far as like enforcing them in the code review, the reviewer needs to be aware of the standards for the organization around securing their code and
Mm.
making sure that their code is operating within the parameters of that organization. So making sure the team is aware is a great way to increase picking up and finding these particular issues. And then moving on from that, some examples in the past, I have done a bunch of work for the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy, and so in our security reviews was usually done by I'll call it, the government works a little weird, right? So there's contractors, there's employees, there's subcontractors for other contractors, there's different departments which are like different entities. So when I say third party in the context of government, it could just be another department in the organization, and they'll have organizations that their sole purpose is to review code. So we were hosted inside of a government data center, and so a third party, which was still the government, but it was just a different department,
Yeah.
would come in, and we would have to show them all of the code and walk them through the code and explain to them everything that was going on, so that we could pass the security framework. But that is someone whose whole job is making sure that everything that's going up on their platform is secure. So that's going to be a little bit more detailed. And if your organization, if you're storing extremely sensitive data, then maybe your organization needs to go there. But I don't think it would be as drastic for, say, a commercial customer. So it would be more just getting some. Like, you could even pick a member on your team, and you could say, okay, you're doing development. But you're also going to be our development security guy. You send them to training, or you give them access to a library that they can train on, and
Mhm.
and then they take the training, and then it's kind of their job to do the security audit. That's another way to do it. That's been an effective strategy in the organization. And I think I kind of went a little off topic there. Did I answer the question, both parts?
Um, you were talking about enforcing secure coding standards during code reviews.
Oh, yeah. I think having, yeah, okay. So I think having someone in the organization who specializes in security, and or maybe one or two team members that specialize in security is not a bad way to go. But I think for this particular topic, you can expect a broad general understanding from the majority of your developers. But if you really want to get serious about security, you should have some people that have some training in securing code, and know what kind of problems to look for in the code, because some of them could be like really hidden. Like it's really hard. Like some of the worst bugs on the planet are when you're in C++, and you have a pointer that goes crazy, and those can be really hard bugs to find. So in a code review process, it doesn't happen in higher level languages much, but just taking C++ as an example, in the code review process, there's a chance it's not going to get caught, that you have a buffer overflow issue, or you have a potential buffer overflow issue. Those are really hard bugs to track down. So in a code review, they may not get caught. However, they might. And so I think it also kind of depends on exactly what you want to do. But if your code needs to be secure and you need to make sure that your covering all your gaps on the vulnerability side, I would suggest having some team members who specialize in securing code, and then they're part of the code review process with another team member, and then the person whose code you're reviewing. And it's a little more resources thrown at it, but a lot, like you get a data breach and your customer data get exposed, your liability goes to the roof, your insurance goes to the roof, everything becomes a much bigger problem. And you'd rather spend a little more money up front and making sure that you're not going to have those problems than spending a lot more money on the back end side after you've lost all your customer data and everyone's not wanting to use your website anymore.
Yeah. And then the second part of that question was like, what challenges have you encountered in this process and how have you overcome them? So in the process of enforcing it with a specialized person.
Yeah, exactly. So what the challenges we've come up upon in the past is companies just not so you find a vulnerability or you find a particular problem, and then the company's not I don't want to say this because it sounds worse than it is, but maybe they're not interested in spending the. I think nowadays this is not a problem. So this be in the past. I haven't seen this a lot anymore, but maybe it's the security vulnerability is riddled throughout the application. Let's just say we're doing web forms and we have inline SQL in just hundreds of pages, and it's going to take tens of thousands of dollars to go through and get everything cleaned up. Some companies don't want to take that, don't initially want to take on that challenge. And then so what you have to do from our perspective is go sell that to the company and basically explain to them and help them understand why they need to spend this money right now, and why spending this money is a benefit, because if something gets compromised later on down the road, it's going to be 10, 20, 30 times the cost to I mean, you still have the same problem, right?
Yeah.
We get hacked and all of our data gets leaked, and now we have all this exposure and the problem is still there. So eventually you're going to have to fix it. So do you fix it now, or do you fix it after you've leaked? Right.
Yeah.
And so that's been one of the challenges, is helping companies to understand the benefits of just taking care of this problem right now. The other problem is helping developers understand too on why they need to do this. You don't get much pushback from a developer as soon as you say like, oh, SQL injection attack right here. I'm using that one a lot. That's one that comes primarily to mind. Everyone's kind of aware of what it is, and so you explain to developer, oh, you can have a SQL injection attack. You can have a cross-site scripting attack. These different things. Most developers are like, oh yeah, okay, I'll go take care of that. And sometimes doing the right thing or securing it the right way, it may be such an edge case, and the organization or the development team or the architects or whoever may decide that maybe that's a vulnerability that they're willing to live with. And depending on the circumstances, that may be okay. Maybe it's like the user has to navigate to this page, then hit the back button, then push this button, then immediately open the debugger and go into the JavaScript and modify this value and then pass up this session thing. It's like this long chain of things that have to go perfect for the vulnerability to be attacked. And maybe it's like, $10,000 to fix it. A company may decide that they just don't want to go down that route. And that's okay. It's all situationally dependent.
Yeah. I think it's just about, like, I think this is why Atmosoft started out in the first place. It's about being able to explain the technical things to people who speak business rather than developer.
Yeah. And when we talk business, the most useful thing for me is to try to get them to understand basically the financial and business impacts of a particular problem, without saying like, oh, this is a SQL injection attack. You can just say there's a security vulnerability in the code, and it could lead to your data being compromised, and we suggest that you fix it. And if you choose not to fix it at some later point in time after an attacker finds the vulnerability and exploits it, and your data has been exposed, you're still going to have to do this work again.
Yeah.
So might as well do the work now.
Yeah, it's either just pushing it down the line and hoping it doesn't get exposed while it's getting pushed, or having to deal with it when it does get exposed.
Yeah. And again, the hacking attempts are up substantially. I mean, I think every day I'm reading of one or two companies that that kind of get hit. So it's kind of wild west out there on the internet these days.
Yeah, I think with closing, the last question I want to ask is, how could Atmosoft help someone if they're looking to help secure their code better to prevent data breaches and stuff like
Sure.
that?
A full code audit is a great tool. That would be someone from our organization or me would come in and we would review all the code, looking for code structure, architecture, and just general issues on the security side and on the architecture side, because you have security problems in multiple places, right? The code could have security issues. The process running the code, IIS, Windows, Linux, could have security issues. The network could have security issues. So kind of expands out, right? But as far as the application goes, a code audit is a good practice, and then putting in place code reviews, where part of the code review checklist is there a you identify the top 10, top 25, however many concerns you have, and then you step through each item during the code review process, and that would be a documented code review process. We're going to so I like to, where I do a code review process, is first thing we do is we talk about what the feature is, what the bug is, right? Maybe there's a demo around that. And then we start diving into the code, and then the developer explains the code, in English or code, is walking to the code. Okay, here I'm checking to see, I'm hitting the database to get a list of customers, and then we're displaying it on the screen, and they walk through their code, and then you don't have to do the walk through the general code part. That's just pretty easy to see what's going on. Typically in a code review, if I'm talking about code, I'm going to go to the code where it's like, okay, I wrote this function and I'm using recursion, and then I'm regexing this, and then I'm taking that value and we're going to recurse again, and then we're going to build up this search tree, and then going into detail on areas of code where the code is complicated is great. Comments in your code are also good, which you should be checking for those in code review. So basically a code review checklist, which includes, your top 5 or however many you want, top 5 security concerns, and you make sure those are addressed in the review. And that's a documented process with the checklist. You go to the code review, you fill out the form online if you want to keep track of that, or you take the paper into the meeting with you and you check off each item as you do that. So documented code review process, a code audit, and then architecture audit I also recommend as well, which would basically help you see if there's any security vulnerabilities in your design, because they can be there. And then separate from us, but we do have partners for this, would be a network security audit or penetration testing. Also, if your organization is very concerned about this, you can also do penetration testing against your deployed application, which is you hire a white hat hacker or white hat, a security expert, and they go in and they try to break it, and then they see, and then that's a good way to get some of those scanning tools will come back and you'll be like 9,489 issues, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. And so having a professional security team come in and do those types of scans, and possibly even set them up to so they're running those scans and sending you weekly reports or monthly reports or daily, even if you want. That's a good service to look into as well. And that just has your application being tested against what is most likely going to be thrown at it in the real world when people start scanning your site. Or your web app.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're coming close to the end of our time today. Is there anything else you want to say before we close out?
No. I think you covered it. I'll just add that, Atmosoft absolutely offers code audit services. We can help you set up a code review process. We can help train your developers on the latest security threats and ways in code that we can mitigate those threats. So those are services that we offer, and happy to share that expertise with any company that's interested in that process.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone who joined us today for the Atmosoft Tech Talk. It was very fun to go over these questions with you. I hope it was informative to our audience today, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow with some more security tips.
Yep. Thank
Bye.
you.